What if the best way to learn a new language wasn't some fancy app or a thick textbook, but a really messy, kind of confusing conversation? Today, we're diving into the interaction hypothesis, this fascinating idea that the real magic happens when we struggle to understand and be understood.
You know that feeling, right? You're trying to order a coffee in another country, you're stumbling over your words, and then bam, that little light bulb goes on. You and the barista finally get each other. If you felt that, you've literally lived this theory. So what is it about that struggle that's so much more powerful than just, passively watching a movie?
Well, that's what the interaction hypothesis is all about. The core idea is actually pretty simple. We don't just soak up language like a sponge. We learn it by doing, by forging it in the fire of real, live conversations, especially the ones where we have to work a little to fix misunderstandings.
And you know what? This theory has a pretty amazing story of its own. It had this bold, exciting start, then it faced a huge crisis that almost killed it, and then it made this incredible comeback that basically reshaped how we teach languages today. So let's start at the beginning.
All right, so it all kicks off in the early 80s with an idea that was simple but honestly pretty revolutionary. It shifted everyone's focus away from the classroom and onto the conversation itself.
So, back in 1981, a psycholinguist named Michael Long put forward his first version of the interaction hypothesis. He basically said, hey, the real action isn't in your textbook drills, it's in the back and forth of a real chat. But as you can see here, this was just round one. His idea was going to face a major test that forced him to update it in 1996. So, what's the engine that drives this whole thing? Well, Long identified this key process that he called negotiation for meaning. This is the real secret sauce, the core of the entire theory.
Think of it like this. You're trying to find a spot in a new city with a friend, and your map is super confusing. You're constantly stopping, pointing, asking, wait, you mean this street here? And checking if you're on the same page. All that back and forth to figure it out, that's negotiation for meaning. It's what we do whenever communication hits a snag. Okay, so let's dig into that original 1981 version. It was simple, it was powerful, and it made a very, very strong claim.
Now, to really get what Long was first saying, you got to understand this key difference he made. He separated passive input, which is just like hearing a language by listening to the radio, from active interaction. Interaction isn't just hearing the words, it's all the work you do to manage the conversation, like asking for help or checking that you've got it right. And that distinction led him to this incredibly bold claim. He argued that this kind of active conversation wasn't just helpful, he said it was the necessary and sufficient condition for learning a new language. I mean, think about that. He was saying it's not only essential, but it's literally all you need. That's a huge claim.
So what does this actually look like in real life? It basically comes down to three key moves. You've got your clarification requests, where you hit the brakes with a, sorry, can you say that again? Then there are confirmation checks, where you try to piece it together. So you're saying I should turn left at the fountain, right? And on the other side, you've got comprehension checks, where someone asks you, does that make sense? These are the tools we all use to fix a broken conversation.
But that super bold claim about being necessary and sufficient, well, it ran into some pretty serious trouble pretty fast. The whole theory was about to face a major crisis. So, as researchers started testing this idea, a big problem surfaced. They found that, yeah, interaction was amazing for comprehension. It totally helped people understand each other in the moment. But the evidence for long-term acquisition? It was shaky. People were getting the gist, but they weren't always actually learning and remembering new grammar or vocabulary from it.
And this pointed to a huge gap in the theory. Okay, so we have an interaction, and that leads to comprehension. Great, but then what? There's this big question mark. How does simply understanding what someone means actually translate into permanently learning a new piece of language? That was the puzzle.
And that was the crisis, right there. The original hypothesis was great at explaining how we get through a confusing conversation, but it couldn't fully explain how we learn from it. Even Long himself had to admit it. Making language understandable was necessary, for sure, but it clearly wasn't sufficient. The theory needed an upgrade.
And that brings us to 1996 and the absolutely brilliant revision that saved the interaction hypothesis by taking a look inside the learner's brain. This 1996 revision was a huge shift from a social model to a much more cognitive one. The focus wasn't just on understanding the message anymore. It was about what was happening in the learner's mind. The new key mechanism wasn't just getting input you could understand, it was about noticing specific parts of the language during a conversation.
And, this is super important, the learner's own speech, their output, was now seen as a crucial part of the learning process itself.
So how did Long fix that gap between just understanding and actually learning? He introduced two powerful new cognitive ingredients that became the new engine of the whole theory. The first upgrade was noticing. So imagine you say, I go to the store yesterday, and your friend gently says, oh, you went to the store yesterday? That little correction, that's negative feedback. And in that split second, that breakdown in communication forces you to notice the gap between what you said, go, and what you should have said, went. That's the magic link. The interaction creates this little moment of feedback that makes your brain pay attention and update its files.
So, this new and improved theory wasn't just some dusty academic idea. It had huge, real-world implications, and it completely changed how languages are taught in the classroom.
In fact, this revised, much more powerful theory is the scientific backbone for one of the most popular teaching methods used all over the world today: task-based language teaching, or TBLT for short.
And the logic of TBLT flows directly from the hypothesis. A great teacher doesn't just hand you grammar worksheets. Instead, they'll design a task with a communication problem built right in. Like, maybe you have a map with some street names missing, and your partner has the missing info. To finish the task, you have to negotiate for meaning. And that negotiation is what triggers the noticing, the feedback, and ultimately the real learning.
This quote kind of sums it all up perfectly. The goal isn't just to practice language for the sake of it. It's to create a genuine need to communicate, because it's in the process of solving those little communication puzzles that the real learning happens. Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. If these communication breakdowns are the very things that trigger learning, then maybe the real secret to mastering a new language isn't trying to be perfect all the time. Maybe the secret is to just embrace those messy, imperfect moments. The mistakes, the confusion, because maybe it's only by getting it wrong that we really start to get it right.